General Ryan, greetings and great to see you on First Western.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
I would like to start with your last visit to Ukraine. I know that you had discussions with Ukrainian military leaders. What did you discuss and why did you decide to visit our country right now?
Well, it was important for me to come back. I'd been there in September last year and I wanted to talk to more people and frankly, I wanted to see more of Kiev, which I thought was a fascinating city full of really interesting people in the military, in government, in think tanks and in the media and other endeavours. And I wanted to get a broad view of how the war is going and how the Ukrainian people are demonstrating such a resilience in the face of this Russian aggression.
Also, recently you said that Ukrainian army is the best in the world. When did you come to this assessment, and what did impress you the most among our army?
I came to that conclusion in 2022, just observing from afar the leadership and the fighting qualities of the Ukrainian military, not just the army, but the Air Force and Navy and its Marines, its ability to outthink and to outfight the Russians in a way that many in the West only dreamed of during the Cold War. But also its ability to come up with innovative ways to use new equipment and its ability to absorb equipment like HIMARS and things like Patriot very, very quickly. So, you know, it's a total package, the Ukrainian military. It's well led, it's now well equipped, and we expect that it will give a great account of itself in the offensives to come.
In your opinion, how did our army change if you compare Ukrainian army before the 24th of February, before the invasion, and if you compare today's Ukrainian army?
Well, I think we have to look back to 2014, and it was a very different Ukrainian military institution before the 2014 Russian invasion. But after that, the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military appeared to have received a fairly significant shock and knew they had to modernise its equipment. They had to modernise how it was organised, and it had to modernise how it thought about war. And I think the appointment of people like General Zaluzhny, who has been very energetic in modernising how the Ukrainian military thinks, how it treats its soldiers, how it leads its people, have been quite transformational.
In your opinion, what lessons could be learned by Western armies, for example, by the US Army, according to Ukrainian experience, Ukrainian techniques on the ground?
Well, I think there's a myriad of lessons that we all should be learning from Ukraine, you know, how to conduct operations with surprise, how to deceive the Russian, there's great lessons there, but also how to absorb new technologies like drones. The Ukrainian military is using thousands and thousands of them across the battlefield to speed up targeting the Russians, speed up finding them, speed up striking them at very long distance. So these are just some of the lessons I think we can learn. But, you know, I think the leadership of how the Ukrainian military operates on the battlefield, but how its most strategic leaders like General Zaluzhny and the Defence Minister Reznikov think and work are also important lessons for us all.
I would like also to cover current situation on the ground. How could you assess current situation on the battlefield in the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think that after what's happened around Bakhmut, the Russian military has gone over to the defensive pretty much across the entirety of the country. They are waiting the Ukrainian offensives to come. They're not quite sure when and where that will happen. They're trying to cower the Ukrainian government and people with these missile attacks, particularly in the Kiev region, but in other places, but to deplete its air defensives in the lead up to the Ukrainian offensives. But I think, you know, Ukraine has seized back the strategic initiative and its position will only become stronger as it launches its attacks in the coming days and weeks.
So you believe that Russia really want to kill the high-rank Ukrainian military leaders by these missile strikes?
Well, I think the Russian military would like to be able to do that, but I think more important is that they want to deplete Ukrainian stocks of their defence missiles to compromise Ukraine's ability to protect critical civilian infrastructure, but also the military forces when they conduct these offensives. They want to be able to attack the Ukrainian forces in the field from the air, and one way to do that is to deplete Ukraine's anti-air missile stocks through the use of these strikes.
Also, what do you think about current situation in Bakhmut? Because Russia face heavy losses on the ground, especially in the Bakhmut.
They've taken massive losses. Tens of thousands of Russians have been killed and wounded in fighting for a city that didn't have a lot of military value, but it's a city of Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian military, defended it for a very, very long time. I think the Russians will find out now that they're in possession of a lot of Bakhmut that it's very difficult to defend, and I think the Ukrainian military will, in the coming offensives, look at either resecuring Bakhmut or encircling the Russians there and put them in a very difficult position indeed.
You mentioned our counteroffensive operation. What is the best case scenario for the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation?
Well, military operations are always full of uncertainty. They're very difficult to predict. I think the Ukrainian military is in extraordinarily good shape when it comes to equipment. It's been training and rehearsing for months. Its leadership have been preparing different scenarios. We would all hope that by the end of these offensives, Ukraine is taken back a large proportion of the territory that's illegally occupied by the Russians, that it's destroyed a large amount of the Russian army that's in Ukraine, and that it's in a very good position in subsequent operations to take back Crimea.
So you believe that Ukrainian army really can liberate all occupied territories, including occupied Crimea?
It should be doing all those things, whether it's just this year or next year as well. But the Ukrainian military is a very, very capable military, the best army in the world, as I've said previously. And whether it takes all of this year or next year and this year, I think the Ukrainian military is very capable of doing that.
Also, there have been lots of new security commitments for Ukraine. Great Britain supply us long-range cruise missiles, Storm Shadow. How could such missiles shape our upcoming counteroffensive operation?
Well, these long-range missiles are allowing the Ukrainian military to target Russian logistics, Russian headquarters, reserve troop locations with concentrations of Russian soldiers at greater distance. That's very important because after Ukraine received HIMARS, the Russians moved back a lot of these kind of organisations. So what this allows Ukraine to do now is to strike the Russian positions that have been moved back after HIMARS. And if they can destroy headquarters, kill senior Russian leaders, that will compromise their ability to defend their illegally occupied territory in Ukraine.
In your opinion, does the Russian anti-aircraft system can really intercept HIMARS missiles?
Well, there's been some speculation that it might be able to do that. The Russian S-300 and S-400 systems are very, very capable against missiles and fighter aircraft, and there aren't too many Western pilots who would like to fly against these systems. So they are very capable. But at the end of the day, if you have enough HIMARS missiles in the air, it's very difficult to shoot most of them down.
Also, the US finally agreed to provide us with training program for our pilots and authorize supplies of F-16 jets. In your opinion, will and could such F-16 jets participate in the upcoming counteroffensive operation?
Well, firstly, I think it's a great decision, finally, that Ukraine will be getting F-16s. The radars and the missiles they have on them will level the playing field with the Russians. And that will push back Russian fighters and the jets that launch missiles into Ukraine that kill Ukrainian people. So that's a very good thing. It will take some months, however, to convert Ukrainian pilots onto these things. The figure I've seen from retired United States Air Force General Breedlove is about 4 months. So it's unlikely we'll see Ukrainian F-16s in the skies over Ukraine in the next couple of months, but potentially by the end of this year.
Also speaking about Ukrainians' counteroffensive operation, in your opinion, could such F-16 help us to deter Russia also in the future?
Yeah, I think whilst Ukraine is very busy winning the war against Russia now, there'll be people thinking about how do we deter Russia from future aggression after Ukrainian victory in this war. At the end of the day, Russia will still be there. It is a large, powerful nation that will be very bitter by being beaten by Ukrainians. So security guarantees provided by things like F-16s, but also NATO membership and bilateral security arrangements and equipping programs after this war will be very, very important.
I would like also to cover the help for Ukraine from Australian government. As there have been some aid. In your opinion, could Australian government do more to help us for the upcoming counteroffensive operation? And what types of weapons, in your opinion, should be donated to Ukraine by Australian government?
Well, I think there's far more the Australian government can do. Up until the beginning of this year, we provided a lot of armoured vehicles, Bushmasters, as well as ammunition and other supplies for the Ukrainian military, and that was very, very welcome on both sides. But this year, I think Australia has fallen behind in its commitments. There's been very little aid sent, and I think we can continue to provide things like Bushmaster vehicles, Hawkeyes, and potentially even the retired F-18 fighter jets, which are sitting in storage. So there is more the Australian government can do. I've been quite vocal about this, and it's in your interests and ours for us to continue providing you military and financial assistance.
But what is the reason of the hesitation of the Australian government?
Well, it's hard to know. There are some who believe it's because we have a threat from China. That's not quite manifesting in the same way the threat is manifesting against Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting for its life. It's a young democracy that has earned the right to be supported by the international community in this war, and we should be supporting it through financial, humanitarian and military assistance.
I would like to go back to the battlefield in Ukraine and cover air battle against Russia. Ukraine has successfully intercepted Russian hypersonic missiles Kinjal using US-made Patriot system. Does it finally destroy a myth about Russian advanced military technologies?
I think it certainly destroys the myth that Putin has been putting out there about Russian wonder weapons. There's no such thing as a wonder weapon. There's no silver bullet in war. And Russian technology is clearly not just these missiles, but their aircraft, their tanks, their artillery. None of them are as good as many of the Western systems that Ukraine is now deploying. So the Russians are in a lot of trouble. They're losing the technological battle in the battlefield. They're also losing a leadership battle. The Ukrainian military leaders are far better. The Russians have a lot of challenges ahead of them, and the Ukrainian military has a lot of opportunity in front of it.
Also, after a massive drone and missile attack on Kyiv, our General Budanov promised to retaliate, and we've seen drone attack on Moscow. Is it a significant development of the war in Ukraine, and what does it mean from Russian government and for Russian army?
Well, wars are ultimately political, and this drone attack was very clever, whether it was done by the Ukrainian military or funded by it or just inspired by Ukraine's struggle. This was an attack on the Russian political system. It demonstrated that Moscow is vulnerable without having to murder civilians, as the Russians are doing daily in Ukraine. So it was a pretty clever drone attack. It looks very, very bad for Putin and his military.
In your opinion, does it make sense to help such drone attack continue? Could they be really harmful for Putin, and could they lead to the regime change?
I'm not sure whether it'll lead to regime change, but it certainly is a political attack. It puts a lot of pressure on the Russian military and the Russian political leadership without causing civilian casualties or significant damage to civilian infrastructure. That's what makes these drone attacks quite clever. And at the end of the day, the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian president have fought this war in a way that sustains Ukrainian values, values human life, doesn't target civilians. And that's why the form of attack that we've seen against Moscow in the last 48 hours is very smart.
Also, Free Russia Legion have attacked Russian soil and liberated several villages in Belgorod region. What does it mean from a military point of view, such attacks?
Well, I think those attacks are very similar to the drone attacks, a very little military value, but it's more, once again, an attack on Russia's political system. It's demonstrating that Russia's politicians and Russia's military can't protect its citizens, even from very simple, small-scale attacks like this. So once again, this will put President Putin and his circle of advisors and supporters under pressure.
In your opinion, if such attacks continue, how could they influence Russian ability to conduct war against Ukraine? Because Russia has faced some losses even during the such minor attacks in the Belgorod region.
Well, it could see the Russian military redeploying some forces to reinforce its border guards, and that may see them pulling some military forces out of Ukraine. At the end of the day, I don't see it having a significant impact on the offensive ahead. Its real impact is a political one for Putin.
Also, recently, representatives of our Office of the President proposed an idea to establish a demilitarized area between Ukraine and Russia. What do you think about it?
Well, I think if there was a zone along the border for a kilometre or two inside Russia that was demilitarized, like exists between North and South Korea, that wouldn't be a bad idea, to be quite frank. To ensure that there's standoff between the two countries so accidents can't happen after Ukraine wins this war is a good idea.
Could such area include also deployment of some troops on Russian soil?
Well, the whole aim of a DMZ would be to ensure there aren't troops deployed within a certain distance of the border, probably on both sides. There would have to be monitoring systems, sensors, and potentially even international observers. But that's something that is a little way down the track, I think, but worth considering as we look at what happens after Ukraine wins this war.
Also, my last question about the future security guarantees for Ukraine. Could such security guarantees also include providing us with the fifth generation planes like F-35 and other modern weapons maybe in the future?
Well, that's something for the future. It's probably not going to occur in the next couple of years. I think Ukraine will probably be focused on bringing in F-16s, and they're very capable aircraft, especially the most recent variants. But at some point in the future, should Ukraine be part of NATO and have the right security arrangements with the United States, those kind of technologies could well be provided. But I think that is a little way in the future.
Also, in your opinion, would it be a great idea to make some agreement between the US and Ukraine on the security, on the territorial integrity as it was with South Korea, for example, and the United States?
Well, fortunately, Ukraine already has a security arrangement with the United States. The Budapest Agreement was between the United States, United Kingdom, Russia and Ukraine, which did provide for the recognition of Ukraine's sovereignty as well as guarantees around defending that sovereignty. Now, clearly the Russians have not lived up to their commitments, as is the case with a lot of their promises, but there is already that commitment there. There's also a partnership arrangement between NATO and Ukraine, and both of these arrangements could be built on in the future to provide more robust security guarantees for Ukraine in the future.
Thank you, General Ryan, for your time and for participation in our interview, and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to Ukraine. It's great to talk to you.